So back again. This time around, we have the beautiful Banshee. We have tried the longest to actually get you on the podcast here. We've reached out, we've called, we've texted.
Oh my gosh, that makes me seem like a bad person.
I'm kidding. But thank you so much for coming through. So the conversation this time around, we ideally want to focus on the gender-based violence. But to begin, you did a 16-day activism program. Can you tell us a little bit of what that was and what that was for?
The one in South Africa?
16 days.
16 days.
Gender-based violence activism. I'm not too sure where it was, but I know that it was 16 days. Is it 16?
Okay, so we were hosting, I was called to represent Zimbabwe in South Africa. It was a festival at the Ford Foundation. And primarily it was trying to incorporate arts and film to push issues to do with gender-based violence with the possible outcome of finding a solution. And it was really great because there were so many people there, and it wasn't just primarily women. It was men also getting involved. So yeah, that was really, really powerful for me. And then prior to that, I was involved in a program called Voice to Rip. And I did, I created a song that is called Defiance. And Defiance is a movement that I started trying to incorporate men, men's mental health, and as it relates to gender-based violence. So part of my artist movement, or my artist functionings as the foundation being the song, I did activism online and offline. So I was kind of having discussions with young people, trying to nitpick their thoughts on gender-based violence, and actually have conversations with men and other artists to kind of find out how they cope in situations where they feel
Would you
violated.
be interested in just sharing a little bit of what you actually learned when you spoke to the young kids as far as gender-based violence is concerned? Because I'm thinking, if they're young kids, they probably should not have much answers. But it would really be interesting to know what it is that you found out, or any patterns or anything that surprised you when you spoke to them.
Not young kids, but young men.
Oh, young man.
Yes.
Okay. What could that be? 12 to 18?
No, it's actually from about 16.
Okay.
Yes. So it was really interesting because I feel the dynamic shifts when it comes to the generation.
Yeah.
If we're talking about men's mental health primarily, I feel men in their prime, when they're the youth, at the time of their youth, they kind of feel the stresses of being a man. And then it kind of becomes exertion rather than them a realization. It's exertion. But then when they are younger, it's they're still getting trained in this whole toxicity, issues to do with patriarchy, and kind of finding their voice. And it really has a negative impact on women because we kind of have to accommodate this whole transitioning, from learning these behaviors when you are young, and then finally coming to a position where you're exerting this negativity towards the women. And I feel there is a need for us to have more conversations around how these two things are manned and how they relate with each other. Yeah,
it's quite interesting. So you were in South Africa, and I think where you were there, you would have probably learned that there is one of the countries that is just plagued with GBV, and not only GBV, but then deaths as well. We're talking husbands killing, shooting, cutting up, and all these crazy things that actually happen. So between the two countries, would you say we've got it's still a problem. We've still got GBV, but then how bad would you say it is in Zimbabwe? I guess this would also indicate to us what our chances are in terms of just dealing with it, and also how much effort we have to put into it once we understand how big a problem we're actually dealing with.
So gender-based violence is very dynamic. People, when we talk about gender-based violence, people kind of stress on the physicality, people harming people physically, men harming women physically. But it's very broad. Gender-based violence could be financial, it could be emotional, psychological. So there are so many things that we are already facing. So for us to then try to put it into one box and say, okay, if gender-based violence, the physical sense in Zimbabwe, this is what is happening, is kind of not making it just, because in Zimbabwe there are so many forms of gender-based violence that are being exerted. So I feel here there is a lot of cases of gender-based violence, especially when it comes to like micro-violence, like, harassment, people just being in your space or not having a voice in the corporate space. Like, you could be very well qualified, but you're not giving the respect that is due. And of like psychological violence, like something like I'm very passionate about, because like, do you know of IPV? That's intimate partner violence. So that is like 1 in 3 women in Zimbabwe actually have actually been subjected to
1
IPV.
in 3.
Yes, of which
I didn't know there was actually a name for that.
Intimate partner violence. Like, it's a person you trust, like you love, like you care for with your life. It's the same person that harms you psychologically, or harms you in terms of finance, or harms you physically. And I feel like that's something we really need to look into, because like that's really alarming.
So GBV in the category of finance, what's that like? Can you like give us an example? Because like I'm following, but then I might not be there as yet. Like, how does is there like an example that you can think of just very quickly?
Yeah. So let's say we have the man as the breadwinner.
Yeah.
Right. And then this man is literally in charge of all the finances. Yeah. And then there's the wife. The wife has no control whatsoever as to where the money is being put or anything like that. But then this man, let's say he's like physically violent as well. The woman will not be able to leave this man because she's dependent on him for finance. So that's a form of financial gender-based violence. It's like you can't leave because you can't stand on your own 2 feet. So it's discriminatory in the sense that as a woman, if I had the means to stand on my own 2 feet, I wouldn't be subjected to this form of violence. Yeah.
What about if it's the other way around? Because there's some cases where the woman is making more money than the man.
Yes. I feel like...
What do you call that? Is that illegal?
It's the same thing, because gender-based violence, of course, like when it actually started to be seen as a human rights violation in 1992.
Okay.
Only.
Yes. And it's primarily focusing on women and children. But if we want to look at gender-based violence in its true sense, it's just violence against anyone of the opposite gender.
True.
So even if you're harming your man, that's also a form of gender-based violence. If you are harming a person of the LGBTQI community who is non-gender conforming, that is also a form of gender-based violence. So like it's very broad in that sense. But if we're talking like primarily women, it's violence against women, but it's used interchangeably. Yes.
That's quite interesting. You also mentioned if this violence is obviously against the LGBT community. Is this like where does this come from? Is this like is it like a law? Is that like classified lawfully as that, or is it just basically how people look at it as like the ideas of, I don't know if that makes sense, here in Zimbabwe, that is considering that we are in a country that's not very supportive of the LGBT community.
Generally, like how GBV is seen as a worldview, it encompasses all genders. But then when we're bringing it back home, of course, like there are so many things that prevent people of the LGBTQI community to like actively be who they feel that they are. So we can't really define it in the terms of where we're coming from, but holistically, gender-based violence just speaks to anyone of any gender. Yes.
That's quite interesting. And how much I'm a very cultural person, and I really love the culture, Chishona, Chindebele, and all of that, and I really am a very big fan in terms of just like the cultural setup in households and all of that. But then at the same time, I can acknowledge and actually get to see how it could also be a contributor to gender-based violence, because obviously when we talk of culture, we're talking having to encourage women to be submissive. This is what we have in Zimbabwe, and also not only culture but also religion. And this is not necessarily wrong, but it really does contribute towards the guys that actually have these women, these beautiful angels who actually are submissive to them, take advantage of it, turn into monsters and then violate them. And all of that. So then if we are looking to tackle this issue, we're looking at a very big problem. At least it comes from a place where some of the things that contribute to it, that enable it, are things that we can almost say we can't change, if that makes sense.
Okay. So I feel like a lot of times it's a war as to which is the best form of exertion of authority. Is it patriarchal or matriarchal? But I feel like whenever we're coming with a solution to a problem, there's always going to be a problem posed by the solution. So what I would advise people to do, or what I would advocate for, is a reformation of patriarchy or reformation of matriarchy, because in its natural sense, it's always going to pose harm. What men don't see is when you are put in a position of power, or if you're given power at a very young age, because like that's what patriarchy does, it grooms you in power. It kind of makes you animalistic, like you can't express how you feel, you can't be vulnerable in your thought process, or like just be human. Like you have to be this unfeeling man who doesn't go through things, like you're just there. But then you are a human being. Before you're a man, before you're a woman, you are a human, you are a person. So like I feel like there are so many things. God did an amazing thing by making us so different, because we are able to learn from each other. So as a woman, I might be like very emotional, like very holistic looking, like, you know, I'm there in the cracks, right? But as a man, you're more reasonable, like logical, like mentally, if we're talking about like the brain chemistry and all of that. I'm not saying anyone is better than anyone, but we are all really amazing in our own personal sense. So when we then come together, it forms like a whole lock and key situation. We become a better solution to the problems that we have. So that's why I try to desist from calling myself a feminist, because I don't want to feel like to seem as if I'm just pushing for advocacy in the feminine sense. I call myself a womanist because I believe I'm trying to bridge the gap that exists between like the genders, or amongst the genders. So it's like trying to understand how patriarchy is harming the men and how patriarchy can harm the women, because patriarchy really harms the men. Power is not always good. And then when it comes to women, it really harms them in the sense that they need to be subduing, they need to be docile, they need to be subservient and all of that. So it prevents them from thinking for themselves, from providing for their families, from just having themselves heard rather than just being seen. So there is a need for us to reform, to make it more, you know, perfect, like better, rather than just, you know, eradicating it. Or the patriarchy, the solution to patriarchy is matriarchy. No, we need to be looking at it at a very objective.
And look to actually seek out for reformed versions of him. That's very impressive. Now I'm thinking though, if we are to look at addressing this issue of gender-based violence, what are we looking at, and where are we meant to put a lot of effort in? Because obviously the gender-based violence is obviously executed by men, and on the receiving end we've got women, and a lot of these organizations actually focus on, it's more, at least from what I've actually picked up and noticed, is that it's more of a lot of organizations that I know that deal with people that have already been violated and the victims of it, help those guys and try and see if, you know, obviously help them to get out of whatever situation that is, and less effort in terms of having to prevent it. And the reason why I say this is because a lot less effort is put into the men who are actually orchestrating and actually executing the gender-based violence. Because then if you were to get to them and instill the ideas of non-violent ideas, the men, and this is us, one of the men. But if you were to focus more on the men, chances are you're probably looking at some not so bad results. I think, but I unfortunately I haven't come across many organizations that actually do this. You might have noticed something different in your experience.
Focusing on men specifically.
On focusing on men to help men understand that don't be violent. These are beautiful creatures. Some of them are light, some of them are dark, but they're like all beautiful, and they're just like they're meant to be protected and loved, and
There is one.
Which one?
Love Shouldn't Hurt. It's a program. It's under the Swedish Embassy, I feel. So like they primarily focus on men. And like when I went to South Africa, I met these men from an organization, I forgot what it's called, but the program that they are running is called What About the Boys? So what they do is like they have mentorship programs for men by men, and trying to like teach them how to cater for women, how to be respectful, how to like fight against all of these woes that are passed on through patriarchy. Like, and it's a really effective means because they actually create like even film so that they can go into communities. And I feel like that's something we should be adopting here in Zimbabwe, like kind of like redressing everything from the root, because these disparities are existing because of the way we are socialized. So what we need to be doing is to undo what we already did, like forming a new culture. Because the culture that we're existing in is heavily influenced by patriarchy. So what we need to be doing is like try to push for conversations with people of older generations, trying to illuminate like the problems that are being caused by patriarchy, and like how it's very evident that misogyny is there. And I feel like misogyny is just like a heightened form of patriarchy, and it's something that we really need to be doing like away with. And there are times when we breed women that are very like vengeful. Like we want to kill the men now, and it's not okay. So that's why there's a need for conversations with different, even women of different like generations, so that we can have like kind of bridge the gap between those that already existed in the time when patriarchy was like the only means, and now us who have access to like other liberal views and stuff. And even those that are perpetrators, I feel like there's a need for us to be communicating with them to understand why they do the things that they do. That's actually something I'm trying to do. I think I had this conversation with you earlier. I'm currently like undergoing like putting together a documentary. Yes, I'm really happy about that because I've always wanted to be a filmmaker. So like kind of having conversations with men who were aggressors or who have been subjected to any form of like trigger when it comes to like their mental health, and like bridging the gap by having conversations.
So Banshee, it sounds to me as if you are, well, think of it as a spectrum. Feminism and whatever the opposite of it is what's the opposite? Whatever it is.
The men's rights activists. He's our opposite.
But think of it as a spectrum. You are not on the far end, which is feminism. You sound as if, from what you've heard from me, is that you obviously not on the far end, not the third wave feminism, which is basically let's kill the men, let's just only have women on earth and all of that. Have you received any backlash from a person that's that far right in terms of feminism?
I do not want to lie. I received backlash when I was kind of confused about where I was, because there was a time I felt like I was a feminist, but then I understood that what I'm doing is harming not only the people I'm trying to stand for, but myself. Because if you are indoctrinated or taught in a certain way, the way you perceive people, even when they haven't done anything wrong to you, becomes very ill. So that's something that I didn't want to do. So my decision to be a womanist was coming from a position of trying to understand everyone from each and every angle. I feel like that's how God observes us. He's just not like, hey, you were fornicating, die. No, but it's like, okay, this man has been fornicating because he gives us the spirit so that we can understand and be redressed and then get salvation. He's patient with us. So that's kind of like where I am. Like I'm trying to be patient with everyone so that we can reach some sort of consensus out of love, because love is the most important thing at the end of the
100%. Day. And do you think that the position that you had, does that have anything to do with religion?
With my religion?
Yeah, because then you seem to be giving off that message of love, and these are usually messages that we receive in church. You're talking about God.
In church.
Generally, when you talk of love, you're thinking Christ, you think He died for us, and you think just the influence of religion, be it Islam, whatever denomination of religion it may be. Usually, when you talk of love, we're talking religion. So, would that be something that have influenced you to move from a point where you're just like far right in as far as feminism is concerned, to bring you to a point where you are just somewhere in between, where you see, you now understand, these results that I'm seeking will not be brought by this year. This is just far too radical. I should probably just minimize as far as the fuel is concerned.
I feel like faith is a very it shapes you.
Yeah.
Faith is not something that just you wake up and feel
you
like you want to do.
Yeah.
It's a whole process. So like I said, like God is very patient with his people. I'm a Christian.
Yeah.
So like God is very patient with his people, and that's like him showing us his love towards us. So I feel like the way I reformed is kind of coming from that position, because in the Bible it says that we should love God with our entire mind, soul, body, and spirit, and then we should love ourselves as we love. Love our neighbors as we love ourselves. So it's a complete hierarchy. It's like God at the top, and then we've got to love ourselves, and then we've got to love others. So when we learn to love God, or we learn to be loved by God, we then know how to love other people. So when you are learning in that position of learning, it's very easy for you to then see the what is preventing you from loving everyone the way that they should be loved. So I feel like God has been like central in shaping me, and is always central in shaping everyone, but you just have to open your eyes to see that truth and kind of like lean on him even when you're doing your activism. Yeah, faith is very important, and it really makes you the person that you become.
I've also just gotten a
No, I just wanted to say, I think it's very interesting that you're saying, because I'm someone who, like, my understanding of like gender-based violence was just from the perspective of Kungoroa Chete, but like I didn't know about the financial abuse, all of that, because I personally was in the past, I was in an abusive relationship, and so it's okay, I've healed. You know, and so it's like I experienced, I think, everything in like the psychological abuse, the physical abuse, sexual abuse, verbal abuse, all of that. So I think this is like really interesting and mind opening, because I also didn't know like the different terminology under GBV, and you know, I'm forgetting my question now. Okay, I think you can talk.
It'll come back. Well, no. Now that you've mentioned what you've mentioned, I'm not thinking to myself, like, how is it possible that man, you know, can actually get to lift their hands, you know, to say such prettiness and beauty, and just like it's.
And I think it comes from like what you're saying, that men also need the attention, they need the help to get, you know, that counseling, because they also, you know, from whether it's from their upbringing or whatever experience they went through in their life, they experience trauma, they have trauma, because you know, like when I was in this relationship, I would make excuses for him, like, oh no, he's just having a hard time, you know, he's broke. He's broke, you know, he's gonna get better or whatever, you know, but they have trauma too, they need help, they need counseling, and I knew that because I'm coming from a psychology background, and I ended up, you know that quote for I studied psychology and then I ended up becoming a professional in like narcissism. That's what happened. So I think this is really important, and I'm like, I don't know, like I'm learning so much, and I know other people as well are learning, because not everyone is familiar with like, we just know kutia andiroa, that sort of thing, but not many people know the implications and also where to go, like where would oh yes, that's the question I wanted to ask. So like,
oh no, sorry to cut you off, but then in terms of let's say, for example, you've obviously, like you pointed out, that you've gone through that experience, the rehabilitation and getting from a place where, because dude, I'm thinking when this was happening for you, you're probably thinking, if I had a gun,
guys,
dude, like if I
that's a very interesting thing, because most of the time, I'm very passionate about mental health as well. So like most of the time when a victim is aggressed, they then become an aggressor.
Literally.
Like hurt people literally hurt people. That's actually an intro in one of my songs. I say hurt men hurt women, and it's actually vice versa. So like sometimes it's not intentional. There are pressures in patriarchy. Sometimes it's a whole means to like exert like force or like be assertive, like power. Like you just don't know what to do with yourself. Like you were saying, probably when he doesn't have money, he's like, okay, how can I assert dominance? How can she submit to me if I don't have money? So the only way that he can do that is by subduing you or gaslighting you, making you think that you are crazy, or like taking your money and stuff like that, controlling your finances. So it's all coming from a position position of trying to heal from trauma. And like a lot of these things are things that we're trying to heal from, that we actually got the wounds from when we were children. Like there's childhood trauma. The way that we were brought up as children really impacts who we become when we are adults. So like we're talking about like the generational gaps. So if your father was very, Murumano Daiso type thing, right? That's what you're exposed to. And you have a daughter and then you have a son. The son will definitely think that they are better than the daughter, and then the daughter will also feel like she's lesser than the son or lesser than any man, essentially, because power is always to the father. And even when it comes to relationships, it's like the partner becomes the owner of the daughter. So your father has been owning you when you were a child, when you were a girl. Now your husband is owning you when you are his wife. It's not supposed to be like that. Everyone should be treated with utmost equality. Equality doesn't mean we're at the same. It means we're differently equal. I believe in equality, guys, because if you put 1 + 1 here, the equation, and you put the equal sign, and then there's a 2, the same in value. 1 + 1 is the same in value with 2, but do they look the same?
No.
Does the equation look like the answer?
Probably not.
No. What about the functioning? Is the equation the same as the 2, as the numeral? No. But they are same in value. So as a human being, we should just be accepting each other and respecting each other with utmost.
I think it's
love.
it's the passion for me. Like when you're speaking, like it's taking me back to your performance. And I think I told you like when you are doing your thing, I start feeling goosebumps. I just like, oh man, I could listen to you all day. It's funny how you mentioned having the past experiences as an enabler of, having to basically convert you into becoming a violent person. You've experienced trauma, and then you actually become the person who traumatizes others. A lot of that comes from corporal punishment. To say corporal punishment, which is like I think in Zimbabwe, when you're doing your movies and filmmaking, they ask, what's the worst thing
Yeah, and even it's funny, sometimes women are the ones who actually cause men to be
That's what I was like, how much does that contribute to you never forget it. It doesn't go away. Like it doesn't.
And even when you have a girlfriend, sometimes that whole, you need to provide for me, you're harming that guy. Like women should be mindful of the things that they say, because it affects the psychology of the men, because when you are failing to provide, like I had said earlier, you try to find means to not exert, find means to exert your dominance to make them feel like you're a man. But some of us, we fail to find the comfort of healed men, because there's so much trauma that's being passed around, and this trauma is coming from the women. That's why the women have to be kind, bro. You need to understand that this person is also just like you. So the same way that you want to be listened to, there are women who say, I want a man who's sensitive, I want to be listened to, but then when he's coming to you with your problems, it's like, he's not man enough.
You're not manly,
what are you doing to him? You're confusing him, you're hurting him. Listen to him and allow him to just be vulnerable if you truly do love him.
That's true.
And then, if you were to say that really sounds like an idea that would face backlash. It sounds as if you're justifying the violent behaviors that then follow. But then,
not a justification.
No, 100%. Yeah, no, I'm totally with you, because I understand that you're pointing out, hey, this is sometimes the reason why it's happening. We're not justifying that it does. If a person is going to be violent, then they're going to go to jail, sure. But then this could have all been prevented if you have behaved or done things separately. And it's usually this would be people that don't necessarily taking just ownership of the things they do, or people that don't necessarily like being controlled very much. And I think this is probably one of the most interesting conversations that we could have, to say contribution. This whole time I was just thinking, right? But then now that you've said this, I'm not thinking, he did that, but then these are the things or series of events that happened before he did. Justifying what he did, but then this is what led to him doing that.
Yeah. You can't trace psychological harm. Like you can go to the police and say, okay, this
like
man
narcissist
battered
damage.
me.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
all of these
Yeah.
things that you've been saying to him, the way you roughhouse him, the way you point at him,
You can't
the way
see
you
how much
stealing
damage it
stuff,
does.
you know,
Yeah.
just being really rude. No one can really see how you're impacting him. We're not like apologizing for these men, but we're trying to see it from both angles. It's not always good the aggressor is hurting the woman because she did something, no. But sometimes the aggressor then does that because you did something. Because men don't really talk. Men are just, you know, and then women talk a lot. So it's kind of like managing ourselves on like different ends of the spectrum. Just be gentle, be kind, you know, listen and speak, right? And then as the man, try not to exert in your physical body and try to have conversations and be real with how you're feeling in the situation. And I feel we can reach somewhere that's actually better.
True, and it's also important that we're talking about this and people become educated, because it all starts in the family. Everything starts at home.
That's true.
All of it. So if you're, you know, in a house that has violence, in a house where, you know, it's not. There's just a lot of inequality, you know, obviously, like you said,
You become a
grow
product of
up-
it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I think it's very important that we're talking about this, and so that we can change our ways. Yeah, and get the healing that you need. Yeah, so like what are some of the places that people can go to get the help they need?
So there's it's called victims friendly unit.
Victims friendly, yeah.
Yes.
So what we'll actually do is that we'll try and get our team to basically list a couple of organizations down for anybody that would actually seek out that help. Just my last question to you. I think it's about time we need to wrap up. Our law, and just like our country, Zimbabwe, and the laws that it has, how much does that affect sort of the progress that we're making? I've heard so many incidences where, you know, people go to the police and actually report with Aman and ways, but then it's not taken as seriously as it should be, and not necessarily because the laws are malfunctioning or not very functional or anything, but then just like the societal ideas of the man wearing uniform, saying Zvatachitaura just previously to say, you know, there's always a belief kuti hapana zvoningo watoita. How much does that help, or how much does that actually contribute to sort of the problem that we have?
Yeah, because like we are putting a barrier and it prevents like victims from talking about like the abuse, and it's not okay because these are supposed to be safe spaces that don't have discrimination. It's like when you're doing your job, even if you are Muslim and a Christian comes, accommodate the Christian, right? Even if you are heterosexual and then there comes a person of the LGBT, just do your work. So there is a need for those who are in authority to remove their own personal beliefs from their work and just do their job. Because if you do not create a conducive environment for people to be talking about these issues, then there will not be effective communication with reference to like fixing the whole situation, and the perpetrators will continue to be the perpetrators and they will go walking on free. So there's also a need even for there to be like a balance when it comes to like gender representation in all spheres of influence. Like even in politics, I was reading an article and it was saying that 25% of all political positions in the entire world are occupied by women. So the rest is men. So how are we going to have women like represent other women if we don't have enough spaces for women to actually like sort out these issues from a policy?
So they're not even in the spaces to make decisions that actually, so they're not represented enough, and I guess that is a very big contributor, and that's not a one-day solution, I think. Unfortunately, we've run out of time. Thank you so much for joining us, Banshee. You've got great ideas, and thank you so much for sharing them on the platform. Hopefully those that will be listening would actually get a bit of assistance, and also the men. You know, I'm now for getting a lot of men actually to change the way that they think, especially young men. 100%. You know, we are totally that. And ensure that this becomes a thing of the past here in Zimbabwe. Thank you so much for joining us. Great.
Thank you.